Welcome to the Children and Family Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 26th of November. I'd like to give a special welcome to our partners, Annette Blackstock from the CCGD and Armand Matheson from the police. It's very important we have partners here to discuss safeguarding issues. We welcome, of course, Kevin Crompton, who's quite familiar to our committee, who'll be leading us through the whole meeting today. Also, a special welcome to the ambassadors, Barley, Becca and Tamara. So welcome to you, and do feel free to ask questions too. Don't be backwards in coming forwards. A special note on a technical issue about WebEx. There were one or two people yesterday at full council who were trying to indicate but failed to do so. Andrea will be keeping an eye on those people who've raised their hands and who've indicated, and will be communicating them to me. But if for any reason you don't think you've been spotted, or I don't play your name back, feel free to message me in private chat. If that doesn't work, do feel free to pipe up. So I don't want anyone to go away saying, I put my hand up, but someone missed me and I didn't get a chance to speak. So do pipe up. I hope that's okay with everybody. And without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Kevin. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to go through the report.
I'm really sorry to have to interrupt. Yes. Sorry, Kevin. I'm really sorry to have to interrupt. But we do have the minutes to do, Chair.
Oh, apologies.
Okay. Are there any declarations of interest, first of all? No. Has anyone got any issues with the minutes of the last meeting?
Andrew, it's Leslie.
Yep.
I am sorry to interrupt. And I do realise when I came into this that there were concerns about the quality of the sound.
Yes.
But it is particularly bad. Now, I don't know if it's bad for everybody or just for me, or whether or not there's any way it can be resolved. But this is a public meeting, and if the quality of the sound that I am receiving is also the quality of sound that people who are in the public arena might be getting, then I don't actually see how we can proceed at the moment. Is there any way the problem can be identified and it can be fixed? But it is particularly bad. It sounds like the old world service in the days of long ago before it got improved.
I see.
It is really poor.
I'm really sorry to hear that. Leslie, what I think I'll do is I will turn my video off, and I would.
Morning. I'm sorry I'm late.
Yes.
I've already turned my video off, Andrew.
I'm turning my video off now. What I suggest we do then is that everyone turns their video off unless they're speaking. Is that be helpful to everybody?
Can I say, sorry to come in just for that. I have severe hearing difficulties, but I'm hearing everything loud and clear this morning, much better than yesterday's council meeting, where I had the volume on full and my ear in the speaker almost, but everything seems to be loud and clear. And I am at my son's in the forest, which normally is a bit of a challenge anyhow.
Right.
I can hear quite well too, apart from when Chris was breaking up.
Okay, so I hate to interrupt everybody, but we have checked on YouTube. The stream is running well, and everybody can be heard very clearly on YouTube. So I think we're good to go. I think, as you've already said, if you're having difficulties, then please switch your video off. This won't be very good for people who don't get to see a face. But, you know, if you switch it on when you do need to speak, and if you immediately deteriorate, then switch it off again. We already know that Kevin will have to keep his off when he's presenting because he has issues. So I can reassure you that we have my colleague Andrea in the background. We also have other people in the background as well monitoring the YouTube link. And at the moment, we are good to go.
Right. Thank you very much, Andrea. So just to remind everybody, we have a single agenda item for our meeting today. Kevin Crompton will be leading us through our meeting, and he will be giving his interim annual report on the important topic of safeguarding. And as you will be aware, he has recently amended his report to take account of the recent Ofsted letter. So without further ado, over to Kevin.
Chair, I'm really sorry, but Leslie interrupted before members had indicated whether or not they were okay with the minutes of the last meeting. So can I just have some assurance that everybody is okay with that? If I don't hear any no's, I will accept.
I don't think I'm hearing any no's.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. Apologies again for interrupting.
All right, are we good to go, Chair? Yes, yeah. Okay, thank you, everybody. So I'm not going to go to the report page by page, just a few words of introduction, if I may. I mean, firstly, it goes without saying this has been an exceptionally challenging year. COVID-19 has stretched all those engaged in safeguarding children and young people. I want to say at the outset that from what I've seen, the evidence I've got, that the Gloucestershire response has been good from all partners, and to have also sustained the work of the improvement journey at the same time, for example, in children's social care, I think we have to recognise is testament to the hard work and commitment of staff in the council and those of partners. So a strong message to you that the experience of the response of local authorities across 4 authorities I know intimately, and Gloucestershire's response has been amongst the best. The second issue, it's been challenging and would have been challenging anyway in terms of the first year or so of the new Working Together 18 arrangements. The old children's safeguarding boards were replaced, including the independent chair role. And there is much more local flexibility in the new arrangements and no specified structures as such. And the other major and significant change is that the council, chief of police and CCG now have a shared and equal responsibility for ensuring that the arrangements for the welfare and safeguarding of children and young people are strong and effective. And that is a very significant shift that the partners are coming to terms with and working out over the year how to make sure that it is a shared and equal responsibility. In relation to my role as the independent scrutineer, this is also a new role. And whilst the intent is clear, to give an independent view of the strength of safeguard arrangements in the area, the methodology is not prescribed. Working with safeguarding partners, we're trying to develop an approach which is evidence-based. Part of that is the revised Section 11 audit process, where I will be meeting with all partners to discuss with them how they're discharging their responsibility. And this has not yet happened. That's why this report into report, because a very vital bit of the evidence gathering it is yet to be completed. So it is a provisional view, but I want to be broadly positive because the partners are working together much better than I observed under the previous arrangements, particularly in the first year of my connection with the council. There was a lot of work to get the partners to work better together. And this has been achieved. I mean, the simple truth is the partners talk to each other in a way that they didn't in the past, a lot more interaction between colleagues and a lot more shared intent. And that's a good thing. So for me, there's been a very, very good start to these arrangements, and I've tried to illustrate some of what's been done over the last 12 to 15 months. The critical period, though, for me is going to be the next 6 to 9 months. That's where I'll be looking at how partners are actually changing and continuing to change working practices which will improve safeguarding. One specific area is going to be tracking the responses, recommendations of serious case review, rapid reviews, local safeguarding practice reviews. I remain optimistic, but I would hope to see a little more pace, notwithstanding the pressure of the pandemic. The and a focus more on changing outcomes rather than process. One illustration of the difference I'm looking for and partners I think are looking for, in response to a previous serious case review some years ago, partners agreed a neglect toolkit. It's now clear that when looking at case files, the use of that toolkit is not as widespread as should be liked. And basically, when examining that, partners have found that some services say they lack the capacity to use that toolkit. As a result, the partnership is looking at how to implement some form of toolkit in a way that all partners would use it. We need to move away, therefore, from responses to SCRs that are about processing ticking box toolkit to responses that are about we have now changed practice. I think the partners know that. I think they're going to work on that. Without further ado, I'd like to open its questions, and of course, you've got the partners in the committee as well.
Can I start with a response from Chris Spence?
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I wouldn't take issue with the essence of what Kevin said there. I think it's a fair and honest reflection of where we are as a partnership. I think we are improving as an organisation, a collective organisation. I mean by that.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, Chris, but you're breaking up. Could you switch your video off and see if that improves things, please?
But I still also think that we've got a long way to go in some respect.
Yeah, Chris, we're not really hearing very much from you at all, even with your video switched off.
We seem to have frameworks in place and agreements made, but it's still, as Kevin referred, critical that those frameworks and agreements deliver outcomes for children and young people.
Chris, I picked up some of that, but I lost quite a bit of that. And maybe we need to think about how we make sure that your comments are reflected through to everybody. Done.
Okay, I've just moved, Andrew. Is that better?
That's slightly better, yes.
Okay. I've left my notes in the other room, but yeah, I think what Kevin has said, if I start from the beginning, is a fair and balanced assessment of where we are as a partnership. I think we now have processes and agreements in place which we didn't have before, but I also agree with Kevin that we've got some distance to go in terms of those agreements and processes delivering positive outcomes for children in a much more consistent way. In many respects, the partnership reflects the improvement journey that we're undertaking in children's social care. You know, it hasn't improved, but there's still some way to go. And I also think that we've got a little bit of distance to travel in terms of that shared and equal responsibility. It really isn't a criticism of my statutory partners in health or police. But when we make an agreement, and Kevin referenced the neglect toolkit, we all three of us agreed that we would do that, and we committed to it and signed up for it at the highest level. And then, you know, we discovered on review that some of the partners were finding it difficult to use. Well, I think we should have highlighted that first, or limited the agreement to one of subject to review in 6 months, something like that. But illustration really of how the partnership is beginning to mature. It is more positive, but it's also reflective of the fact that we've still got some distance to travel. So I'm cautiously optimistic, I think, about the partnership, would be my summary.
Very much, Chris. I have Leslie and then I have Brian. So it could be Leslie.
Yeah, no, thank you. I actually think probably my hand is there because I raised it because of the reception, but I will take the opportunity to say thank you very much to Kevin. And it is interesting how so much of this reflects the the wider work of what's going on with the children's services. I mean, including the word pace. The pace is something which crops up time and time again. But I was interested to hear, Kevin, what you had to say about the partners, and the fact that the partners are seemingly getting on better. And I wondered, it feels to me like a lack of trust. And what can be done to get people to trust each other, to work together well? After all, the common interest is about looking after our young people and making sure that the best is developed for them. I mean, do you ever go off on away days and sort of get to know each other a bit so you can learn to trust each other? It just feels that I say this sort of absence of trust with we're all working together to achieve the same ends. And so I'm really not expressing myself terribly well here, but thank you very much for letting me come in when I wasn't expecting to. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Leslie. Yes, I like the idea about away days, though that may have to wait until we're out of any kind of lockdown. Brian, can I bring you in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I just check that everybody can hear me first?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Right. My question really picks up on the. I mean, obviously, it's very good news that you're reporting that the partnership working is going much better. I think that's excellent to hear. I just wanted to explore it a little bit around the COVID response, because I think what we've heard in previous meetings is that during the lockdown, the first lockdown, the number of referrals to children's services dropped significantly. And also, we know that a lot less people went to hospital, and actually a lot less people were out on the streets. Now, my own feeling is that probably in normal times, schools play a key part in the referral process because they have access to children and they see them in situations where they might be able to spot that need. And so do the police have a big role, because they're obviously, in some respects, the people that are obviously first in line if there are issues out on the streets. So I think if we had a lot less referrals, the comments that we're getting that actually we worked effectively during that period, and that the joint working work, was that because you had less demand on your services? So one question is, and the second question really is, if our task is to make sure that children are safe, during that period, are we confident that there were less issues that affected children? In other words, was the lockdown good for children? Or is it just that we didn't see what was going on because they weren't at school, they weren't on the streets, they weren't going to hospital with minor injuries or routine treatments? So actually we were blind to what was happening with children at that time, which obviously is a big concern. And so obviously our responsibility is to make sure children are safe, not only when it's visible. So my question is, how do we know that we did that job well? And how do we explain away the fall in referrals during that period? So the second point I'd like to pick up on is around schools, because I noticed we got the 3 partners here today, and they are the core ones. But as schools are one of the key partners in delivering referrals and everything else, why aren't they also present today, and why aren't they one of the top line partners? And I accept that the county council has a role for some schools, but the majority, particularly for secondary schools, now are independent. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, can we have a response to that from Kevin and or Chris?
Yeah, if I think then Chris will come in. I mean, can we take the last question first? I think everybody would agree about schools. The difficulty in the current environment is who you engage. And it's also been an ongoing national debate with a body of opinion saying that working together 18 was not strong enough on emphasising the key role of schools, and that question as to whether they should be one of the safeguarding partners rumbles on. I can say
we lost you briefly, Kevin.
From the Gloucestershire arrangements, sorry, more I'm sure, but as mentioned, engage schools in the new executive and the delivery board through the representative groups. In terms of were children safe during lockdown, what I have observed is a whole range of work trying to risk assess a situation where you cannot deal with what you do not know. And there's been a lot of work done on whether there was this latent demand in the system, were we missing cases. But what I've observed both here and indeed in Devon where I work is working with schools, and through the work of things like vulnerable children's cells, children have been tracked, known risks have been managed. The police, for example, reconfigured one of their teams to ensure they visited any family potentially on their high-risk register around domestic abuse. So I think partners have done an awful lot in a very difficult situation. But I think you're right, Councillor. During lockdown, it's clear that some children have had mental health issues, for example, have been in environments where we would rather they weren't. But, you know, the system can only do what the system can do.
Thank you. Can I just come back on the interesting point, which I think the police were visiting high-risk situations. I just wondered how that works, really, because that almost feels like it might actually create a higher risk. So I just wondered how the police manage this sensitive issue of trying to be involved and understand what's going on without actually raising the stakes of situations as it goes.
It's Armin Mack, so I can comment on that.
Please come in.
Yes, if that's okay, Chair. Can I just confirm everyone can hear me?
Yes, I can.
Lovely, thank you. Yes, absolutely valid question and something that we gave much consideration to, and covering some of the points that you have raised within my answer. So demand, yes, was lower within the first lockdown. I don't think that the lockdown was good for the vulnerable, and we're seeing that now with an increase in demand that is coming, and some of that is latent demand that has come from that first lockdown period. With some of the spare capacity that we had within policing due to that reduction in demand, we utilised officers, specially selected officers that were previously trained and had an awareness of how you deal with vulnerability in the most sensitive of ways. And we created a small dedicated specialist team that, with analysis of demographics and individuals that we were already aware of, would conduct sensitive visits in a manner of different ways, not simply just knocking on the door, to ensure that crime was not occurring behind closed doors and that the vulnerable were still receiving a service.
Yes.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yes, that's really good. Do feel free to come in on these issues. One of the important things about our scrutiny committee is that we want to involve all the partners and the ambassadors in this process, because scrutiny is not just about GCC services; it's about our children. So feel free. Don't be backwards in coming forwards, as I said earlier. I've now got Bernie, Stephen Hurst, and Stephen Davis in that order. So, Bernie, do you want to ask your question now?
Chair, could I come back on that before moving on?
Sorry, pardon, Chris. Yes, Chris, do respond, and then we'll move on to Bernie.
Because I think Councillor Robinson has raised, some important questions, and I'm quite anxious, really, being a half-empty person, to present once in a while as a half-full person. And one of the things that I think we have done well is sustain good quality services throughout COVID and despite COVID, and within what's been the biggest national crisis since the Second World War. It has had an impact on children's services. And the first thing I'd like to say is that I think Councillor Robinson, if I'm reading his question right, is correct in thinking that there isn't a reduction in the risk to children. In fact, there's been a heightened risk to children because they're out of sight, if you like, of schools, who are one of our biggest referrers. Now, we did have a duty to try and get as many children considered to be at risk in school during the first lockdown, and we did that reasonably well. But, I share his concerns, and that's why we had and ran the campaign out of sight but not out of harm's way. And we did a couple of radio programmes about that during lockdown, and we delivered a leaflet through every door in the county, reminding people, the community that is, that they are, during this period, our eyes and ears. So we did a lot to try and make certain that children who were at risk came into our line of sight. But inevitably they didn't, because they weren't in school. And schools, as I say, are a main source of referrals and concerns. And that's where we pick them up.
Andrea, Chris has gone.
Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll go on to Bernie's question, but if Chris comes back into the land of the online, then I'd like to go back and hear from him again, if that's right with people. So Bernie.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's all I hear. I think that obviously I agree with the thing about schools. Schools probably more than
referrals, particularly. So we are seeing a little bit of a bounce back, but not a huge bounce back. Sorry, can people hear me?
Yeah, Chris, we lost you halfway through to the point where I invited Bernie to come in until you were back. So you may want to backtrack a little on your comments.
Okay. Apologies. It's difficult, isn't it, when the line is as it is. So I was basically saying that we did quite a lot of work about trying to reveal and pull back the curtain on children who were at risk by running the campaign out of sight but not out of harm's way. We did. I did one radio presentation on that, and others did as well within the service. And we did a leaflet drop to every household in the county, which asked them to act as our eyes and ears for children who may be at risk and out of school. The other thing we did is encourage parents through our schools to get those at-risk children into school, and we did better than any other authority in the southwest of England. If you look at the proportion of vulnerable children and key worker children, actually, who were in school during lockdown, it was higher here than the southwest average by some distance. And as I say, we were the best in the whole of the southwest of England in that regard. So we did everything we could to mitigate those circumstances. And with regard to COVID itself and our response to COVID, we didn't do better just because there were fewer referrals. And I think when we get to look at the focused visit letter, which isn't the purpose of this meeting, that's next week's meeting, you'll see that the letter is peppered, literally, with positive comments about how we reacted and responded to our duties during COVID. But I'll save that until Tuesday.
Chris,
Thanks,
although
Chair.
I think it's sufficiently important that it can be broadcast twice, and congratulations to you and Richard Boyles on it.
Okay. So I think, in essence, to say the letter is a good reference point for us, because it does show that we did very well in meeting children's needs. We had a higher proportion of children seen. We maintained face-to-face visits with at-risk children, far more than some other authorities did. We worked with our frontline workforce. We made sure that they were safe and that they could carry out those visual checks on children, which are so important. And of course, we're very innovative as well. For example, we set up a virtual court room. We've now got 2 of those, one in Gloucester and one in Cheltenham. So families could still attend court, but not attend court, if you like. They had live links from a room in Shire Hall and from Edinburgh House in Cheltenham, so that they could attend court and those cases could be progressed in a timely way. So I think that's one example of where we led the field, not just regionally, but nationally. We're in the forefront of setting up those remote courts. So that we were commended for that as well. So, in summary, I still think there will be a backlash in terms of demand when schools do settle back to something like normality, because at the moment, schools are under a huge amount of pressure. Charlotte could be testifying to that, I'm sure. And the logistics of managing schools during COVID are just unbelievably complex. It's not just about how you teach children, but it's how you get them onto site safely, how they exit the site safely, how they remain in their bubbles, not just for their classroom teaching, but also during free flow periods like lunchtime, in between lessons and playtime. Just maintaining a safe environment within a school with such an intensity of people, young people, albeit, it's just logistically very, very difficult. And unless you're actually there to witness it, or you're involved in the organisation of it, it's very difficult to imagine just how complex it is. But it is very complex. And what it means is, in terms of this discussion, is that staff just do not have the time or the space that they would normally have for a child to sidle up to them and say, I want to tell you something. They're just so busy. There's just no space in the day for children, I think, to access staff in the same way as they have been doing under normal circumstances or pre-COVID.
Thank you, Chris. Would this be a good opportunity just to ask Charlotte if she had any reflections on that, and particularly how she had schools able to cope with conversations with children?
Yeah, thanks. That's really true, Chris. It is tricky at the minute, and we have incidentally actually just 3 days ago had a disclosure from a child who literally just asked to speak to somebody different. So that isn't necessarily what we have found. However, I think it ordinarily would be. I think the focus, you're quite right, we're all doing extra duties. We are we don't have downtime with the children. We're working longer days, and therefore we haven't even got that swap over time with seeing the parents. I think that's really tricky, because often you get a bit of a tip off from the way a parent looks or behaves with their child as they're dropping them off in the morning. But of course we haven't got that, because none of us are allowed to be face to face with these parents at the minute, and we're literally receiving them at the gate and shooing them off as quickly as we can off the school site. So those things are tricky, but also I think the other stuff that we're trying to deal with in schools means that that some things can go by the wayside, and I would hope that safeguarding isn't one of them. I think safeguarding has been absolutely at the forefront of everybody's minds, and not just immediate safeguarding, but also future safeguarding. So things like the welfare and well-being of our children. You know, we've had to make decisions where we're releasing time away from key objectives and key learning like English and maths and science, and so that we're able to give children simply time to talk. So that time to talk is being planned in for exactly this reason, but it's not always the time that the children choose to be able to tell us things. So lots of decisions being made, and absolutely Chris is spot on. He's kept very well in contact with what's going on in schools, including joining our school's COVID calls, and that's exactly what we're finding at the minute.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you very much for that. I think that's really important, actually. Bernie, can we go back to you now? Sorry that you were interrupted.
Not a problem. I'd just like to ask the question, really, about are our partners communicating with each other better, or is there still a long way to go? And also, are they sharing info? Because it's all serious case reviews and things like that. It always strikes you that there's been a breakdown in communication between the partners, and it shouldn't be. And also, the bit about schools, if I can make a comment as well, I've got insider knowledge, really. My son, my daughter-in-law, and my daughter all work in secondary schools. My daughter's a deputy head, my daughter-in-law is a senior member of staff, and my son's a senior member of staff in schools in Gloucestershire. My daughter's in Wiltshire. But they are working very hard, and some of them seem to be managing COVID better than others. But it's a shame, really, that across the school system, there's not a common approach. And you know, we should be looking at best practice and looking at the schools who cope well now to see what they're doing, because we don't know when it's going to end. Because it is, obviously COVID has had a great caused us all great problems, but I think kids who need support have probably suffered quite badly because of COVID, because we haven't been there for them, and in some ways they've been restricted in probably places where they shouldn't have been restricted. They haven't been able to go to school in the first lockdown and hear that. And that's what I hear around the kitchen table sometimes.
Thank you, Bernie. Kevin, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just briefly. So I think it depends. You have to look at two different levels. There's certainly an improvement in communication at the most senior level. Just to illustrate that, you know, a couple of years ago, I would find myself suggesting to people that they meet. Invariably now when an issue arises, they've already met to discuss. And I think that's about the way people have been conducting themselves differently. So communication at a senior level has improved, and all the meetings are very, very purposeful. So I think that's good. Information sharing, a lot of work has been done to make sure that the frameworks are there to encourage people to share. If, however, I look then at what messages are coming out of rapid reviews and serious case reviews, there's still work to be done to make sure that that commitment to information sharing is always operating amongst frontline staff, and indeed that the communication between agencies on the front line it could also be improved in some cases. So there's sort of a two-tier response from my view. At strategic level, it's better. At operational level, it's a constant need to keep emphasising that we need good information sharing, good communication between partners.
If I could just come back on that, with all our partners here today, perhaps we could hear from them how they feel about communicating with each other. And obviously you say the system is there to share info. You didn't really say that it's working well or not.
Just quickly before you explain partners, it doesn't always work as well as it's intended to do. The serious case reviews tell us that, Councillor, don't they? But it does work well in a number of cases.
Okay, thanks for that. I wonder if I could invite first Anne and then Armand to comment on that. And Annette, from the CCG perspective.
Yes, I've started my video, but I don't know whether I might have to turn it off. But just wait, I can see a few faces. If I'm not coming through, then let me know. Obviously, from a health partnership perspective, I've just written a few things down really to share. I think in terms of communication, we feel very much that there's been a collaborative of partnership briefings, and in the main, GCC, Children's Services, are producing briefings and sharing them across the partnership, and we cascade them on further. So they go out to key partners and they're shared downwards. And that's around lots and lots of aspects of direct care with children. So the information that Chris talked about, court proceedings and what's happening, face-to-face visits and what's happening. So all of that activity that Children's Social Care are doing, we can share what that looks like. I share it with my health colleagues in provider trusts and across primary care, so that they can see what that looks like. So when they have a concern about a child, they'll know what the expectation is. So a child with a plan, child in need or child protection, child in care, this is what it looks like. This is what practice looks like at the moment when we're really, really struggling to get in and see people from a health perspective. So Children's Social Care have opened up that knowledge for us so we can see that. And from a health perspective, it's really good to know how children, our most vulnerable children, are being seen and cared for by Children's Social Care, and how then we react as health partners around that plan. So that's been really good. The vulnerability cell that Chris and I think Kevin talked about as well, I've been actively involved in that. Now that's not solely, my work predominantly is all about safeguarding those most vulnerable children, those children that we know about. But what we know in COVID is there's this huge number of children who have been impacted in terms of food and fuel poverty, lack of access to services, no universal services out there. And the vulnerable cell which has been led by the County Council, has done a huge amount of work to pull together what resources are there and share those out. And that's been cascaded, I feel, very well across the early help platform. So things like, how do we get mental health acts? What are the inroads to the information we need to share about that when we think about all those things? Again, we share that across our partnerships. So from a CCG point of view, I use my position in terms of strategic health group. So that's that's a safeguarding strategic health group, but that is a cascade down through to providers. And we also have primary care forums. So that's GP forums that are attended by safeguarding leads. So our primary care GP safeguarding leads attend forums 3 times a year. We have a cascade mechanism to that, but we have a virtual forum just like we're meeting now. And we've had 2 or 3 of those that address adult and child safeguarding. So they're all venues where we've shared that vulnerable cell information. This is a resource. We also know that there's been a huge financial resource so there's been a good address by the local authority to support the free school meals, for example, vouchers and so on. So without going into the fine detail of all of that, I know that is all happening and really confident that that's happening. And that's information that we share with our universal, from my point of view, our health colleagues. So there's an awareness of that and how to access funds, how health visitors, for example, how school nurses, how GPs can access and signpost families for that. Through COVID, at the very start of COVID, the CCG linked very quickly. So the health service was mandated to change and redeploy staff, nursing staff, medical staff, to respond to COVID. And that was a mandated response by NHS England. So there were so many parts of that that meant that the way health worked had to be very, very different, because nobody knew what COVID was going to be like when we saw that in its early phase in March and April. We've learned a lot from that, and at that point where services were mandated, it was very, very clear to us and made clear to us from NHS safeguarding those involved in safeguarding children and safeguarding adults would not be redeployed. So positions were held firm and work was able to continue. No staff were removed from those significant posts, like the MASH posts, the nurses who work in MASH to do the research, those specific posts that are around safeguarding. So reinforcing and supporting that message of safeguarding from a health point of view has been really, really important and very much a priority, and not a service that has changed. I think what we did see, and we have seen, is that staff in universal services were moved around, and that, you know, there was a lot of concern about how that may impact or would impact and did impact on services delivered directly to children. So, but there were certain aspects of services. So for example, health visiting, you know, routine birth visits, routine contacts that were supported to go ahead and continue. So lots of parts of services continued, but there was still movement of staff. In this second wave, as we go into concerns about where people are working and what people are doing in terms of health services, it's a very different picture. So we have, clear assurances that there's lessons in the early part reflected in how services are provided now. And yeah, there was, we did hear from GP practice and we did hear from emergency departments that the places were quite empty, appointments weren't being taken up. It was quite a relatively short period. It soon, once the message was out and the message went out about, up and running for business, we want people to come in and see and have your, raise your concerns about general health. We were concerned about children not being brought in with ailments and illnesses that they would normally have. That has changed. And now we're seeing GP practices, emergency departments, is as busy, if not busier than ever. So that's that side of things. So from our point of view, the other thing that I wanted to say was that the reach out to that wider vulnerable group from a health point of view, the CCG utilised staff who were unable to work face because of their own vulnerability, but we had a huge project occurred in terms of making phone calls and contacting those shielded and vulnerable people in our community. And for the most part, they were adults, but there was a high number of shielded and vulnerable identified children. So there were phone calls and contacts that linked up with that. And I think there was something in the region of 7,000 to 8,000 contacts made to assure that those people were getting the right health services that they needed. Did they feel that was the case? So phone calls were happening on a very regular basis, and getting personal contact with those people from a health professional. And at that point of that being set up, I made sure that safeguarding was top of their, were they alert? Did they have their eyes and ears open to vulnerability? So those sorts of calls did prompt responses around domestic abuse, disclosure, how people were living, whether they needed extra support for food, any equipment they needed, and what was happening for them in terms of mental health support and so on for them. And obviously key for this meeting is around the children. So those actions all took place within a very, very quick amount, very short period of time. It all got together, happened, and now it's we're looking towards now the vaccination planning, which I know Marion is hugely involved in. So I hope that's given some idea of how we feel we are connected with what's happening in Gloucestershire. For myself, I deputised for Marion, and the safeguarding executive did meet on a more regular basis through the COVID. We did get, and we have had, reports on activity, so data and information about activity that's happening around seeing children, MASH referral activity, early help information, outcomes from that. And then the other part that I've been hugely involved in is the serious case review. I chair the Quality Improvement Practice meeting, and we have brought that meeting together over the last year with the huge support of the Safeguarding Support Unit. But we have in Gloucestershire undertaken a number of rapid reviews. The process now under Working Together 2018 is very different. We've moved away from the traditional, the old serious case review, and what we do is under Working Together guidance, we hold rapid reviews, which are exactly as they say. An incident about a child is raised, and within 15 days we report to the Department for Education on what happens around that review. So we've had the review. It's a partnership discussion over a 2-hour period, facilitated, and pulling out what is it about this case that has brought this concern up. What do we need to know about learning? You know, the key parts, and what's different about this case that we need to understand more learning. So in one occasion, we've got one safeguarding practice review that we've commissioned as a result of that. So we are working faster. We are getting that information out there quicker. We share that information in the same way that we share other information. And I think I know what I've seen in the last year and a half is, through the partnership, we have better representation on our subgroups around the partnership work, how we galvanise that, the learning, how we know things are working better, how we look at outcomes and impact. We see a hugely improved partnership engagement at the subgroup level, at the working level, and that's practitioners working, linking on the ground. I see that happening. And I think we've got a really good focus on an audit programme around, as Chris says, you know, what is it about the neglect, about measuring and understanding and evidencing neglect that we don't get right as a partnership? What is it about child protection plans that health, for example, aren't necessarily understanding? And I think a key part that I know that my colleagues in the MASH would say is around the early help. And what is it about our understanding of thresholds? Because we know we get lots and lots of referrals in that then go over to the early help agenda. And we are all early help. Early help isn't place, it's what we all do together. So I think I've spoken for quite a long time, so I think I'll stop talking.
Thank you very much, Annette, for that comprehensive response. I wonder if I could bring in the police now. Armin? Do we still have Armin Matheson on the call? Perhaps not. Okay. Perhaps we'll come back to Armin later. Now, I've got quite a few people who've indicated to speak.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think Armin is on mute, which is the problem.
Right.
I have asked him to unmute, so it's just a question of whether he picks up that request.
Okay.
I have unmuted.
It looks as if he's not there on my list.
No, he's just come online.
Hello, Jen.
Okay.
I am sorry. I was muted. I have unmuted myself.
Okay, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to start again from the beginning in that case.
That's fine. It's a problem, Jen. So to answer the question in relation to are we working together with partners and are we sharing that information? Are we working together? Yes, absolutely. The joint working is very thorough. It's regular. It's detailed. I entirely agree with the independent scrutineer, though, that it is more vibrant and the relationships are stronger at a strategic level than it is perhaps at an operational level, and that is some of the work to be done that we heard about earlier. And I again would reflect those comments as previously discussed, that partnership working is going very well, that progress is being made, but there is more work to do. As Annette mentions, though, it doesn't just sit at a strategic level. So tactically, the subgroups are well attended and productive. They are delivering good results. And to pick up on a point earlier that Leslie made around, do we look to build trust and relationships at all levels? Well, yes, absolutely. And we are actually in the process of planning an away day, looking at our multi-agency safeguarding hub, the MASH, and understanding what we can do to broaden the relationships within counterparts across the partnerships. And that then leads, I suppose, on to information sharing. And the point that the independent scrutiny made around, yes, we do, but then the challenge that came back. So I would say, yes, we absolutely do have all of the policies and processes in place to share our info, which has often been a criticism. However, they alone are not enough, are they, to ensure that the information is shared, and there is a cultural piece around attitudes and behaviours which are often entrenched and based on sometimes decades of practice. And that's far harder to unpick. However, we are absolutely in a position where those conversations around attitudes, behavioural, cultural change are being had by myself and partners in an effort to start to address some of those further improvements. So that would be my response, Jeff.
For that. So here in Gloucestershire, we've had the Social Work Academy, which was set up to basically to change practice, and that was set up a couple of years ago. Have the police got anything similar?
The social work practice is just a little bit more information, though, if I could please, Chair.
One of the first things that Chris did when he came here was to set up a social work academy to teach the best possible practice in children's social work. That's been recognised in the Ofsted letter. So they've recognised that things that Chris put in 2 years ago are now starting to bear fruit. I just wondered if there was an equivalent training programme for those members of the police service who are involved in children's social services.
Yes, there absolutely is. There's on multiple levels. So nationally, we have a well-structured training programme run by the College of Policing, which is now accredited to offer degree-level qualifications to all police officers that go through those programmes. Any police officer that takes a pathway of becoming a specialist working within public protection, or even specialising further working within the safeguarding of children, there are tailor-made training programs to deliver, and indeed accreditation, qualification and requirement to demonstrate continual professional development on a yearly basis. Locally, we recently opened the Sabrina Centre, which is a huge investment for the constabulary into a training facility that will deliver an excellent level of training as an ambition, both locally and regionally, offering training outside of the force area. There has, however, being entirely candid, been a lack of training this year because COVID has impacted upon our ability to maintain our training schedule. However, all of those practices around delivering a training and accreditation, working within these areas, because of course, some aspects for us around evidence, procedure, prosecution. So we always must ensure that at every interaction we have, we maintain the highest levels of quality and professionalism.
Thank you very much, Armin. I now have Stephen Hurst, Stephen Davis, Lorraine Patrick, Charlotte Blanche, Colin Hay, Richard Castle and Brian Robinson in that order. So we've got quite a few people who want to speak. So without further ado, can we move on to Stephen Hurst?
Thank you, Chair. In view of what's gone on since I realised this may be a bit of an unnecessary question. And it's certainly some regular members of this committee may think the question is stupid and naive. What I would like to know is, when earlier part of the meeting, when we're talking about similar parallel paths of actions to other children's committees, do we know if that's true? And more importantly, do we know why it is? Thank you.
Yes. Kevin, do you want to respond to that?
Sorry, could you expand a little bit, please, Stephen, on the question?
Sure. Earlier in the meeting, we were talking about similar, almost identical paths of progress to other children's committees in the county council. And I just wondered why that is, and could anything be done to rectify these parallel paths of progress? Is that better, Kevin?
I'm still not understanding. You say children's committees within the council. Which committees?
Maybe corporate parenting, committees of that nature. We're saying there are similar speeds of progress there, and all children's committees which are Ofsted regulated.
I think I might defer to Chris on this, if I may, Chair. That's how you bring together your reporting to corporate parenting and so on. I think that would be more appropriate. Just Chris, give us some background to that.
Chris, if you wanted to comment on that. I must say I wasn't entirely sure where Stephen was coming from myself on that, so I think I've got some sympathy with you, Kevin. But Chris, can you respond?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I think how I would try and answer Stephen's question is that if there are parallel paths to different committees that are reporting similar improvements, which is how I interpreted the question, and I think that's perfectly understandable, because I think we've all been, as statutory partners, on similar journeys. I mean, the police over the years have had a pretty poor set of inspections. It's much better now. The local authority has had a pretty poor set of inspections around safeguarding, I mean, specifically, not generally. And I think for that reason, that reflects and impacts on how we work as a partnership. Because if you can't get the knitting right, to begin with, it's very difficult, isn't it, to work with others to improve things beyond what you have to put right yourself. So I do think there's a very positive momentum in Gloucestershire, with improvements that the police have made over recent years, with improvements now that we're showing in our latest focused visit. There is some sustained improvement across both services, and that gives us more time and space to work with health, and it gives health more confidence in working with us. And actually, it gives us more legitimacy in holding health to account for what they're not doing, perhaps as well as they might, because it's very, very easy if you are in that space where you're operating quite well and service that is challenging you to put that down to, well, it's just a weakness within that weak service. And I think there's now an emerging parity between the three services, a mutual respect, which you've heard about, and I think that augurs well, and it's probably an explanation for why you're getting similar messages or parallel paths being shown in different committees within the council and more broadly across the partnerships. And I'll just say one last thing. and I always think examples are good things to illustrate. I think what this paper and what you've heard from various participants reflects well that we're making good progress. And it relates a little bit to what I was saying about procedures and processes all being in place, but actually implementing them consistently and embedding them so that they become part of the culture is the next level. And that's the next level that we've got to get to. And a good practical example is that we now have a hospital discharge policy. So if we have, for example, a young woman in hospital who has attempted to take her own life by one means or another, now the hospital may patch her up and make sure that physically she's okay. And in the past, they would have discharged her at a point where they thought that she was medically safe to discharge, and that from a clinical point of view, there's nothing much else they could do. But of course, that doesn't mean to say that that young woman wouldn't make another attempt on her life. So now the hospital discharge protocol in place, which means that before hospital discharges a young person in that position, that we need to know where they're going and what their care arrangements are to try and protect them from any further attempts on taking their own life. And so we've now got those arrangements in place, but occasionally we still get young people being discharged, and we have to say, whoa, hold on, you can't discharge her until we've done the planned discharge and followed that route. And so it's, there's a lot of goodwill and good intent, but we still haven't quite embedded those agreements and arrangements to the degree that I and others would like. And it's part of the...
Sorry, Chris, we missed you. We missed you briefly. The last bit I heard, we still haven't embedded them as much as we would like.
Yeah. So did you hear the example I gave?
Not beyond the discharge of the young female before we got appropriate care arrangements for her. I didn't. If there was something after that you gave an example, I didn't catch it.
Yeah. So in brief, what I was trying to explain was that we now have a discharge process in place, which is a good, safe discharge process, which means that a young person who attempted to take their own life won't be discharged from hospital until her care arrangements have been made for her. Whereas in the past, she might have just been discharged. But we still need to embed that so that it becomes common practice. So we're still getting the odd occasion where young people are discharged from hospital before their care arrangements are fully organised. So that's the difference between an improving and a mature partnership, I think. And I think that's an example that illustrates well where we are. So it's a positive direction, good things happening, but we're not yet mature.
So, Chris, my question to you then is, how do we get to that level of maturity? I'm not thinking about the specific issue about a hospital discharge, but more broadly, how do we develop that maturity? And if you look at it from a children's service,
it falls back. It falls back onto what Armin and Annette have already said about regular communication up and down and across the organisations about what our shared arrangements are, and where we fail to observe those, to remind each other of what our own and others' responsibilities are in cases such as the example I gave. So, I've got no doubt that we'll get there, but I just don't think we're mature as an organisation yet. We're an improving organisation, but not a mature one.
What more do
Chair,
do to get to a mature organisation, Chris?
Well, I think it's to continue the journey we're on and to keep doing what we're doing. I don't think there's any other things we can do. Sometimes, it takes a little while to embed new practice and new agreements so that they become second nature and business as usual. And I think we've got a lot of good agreements and arrangements in place. They just need some time to embed and for everybody to become aware of them and to use them more consistently.
Chair, can I make a brief contribution?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. So having bought myself some time to reflect, actually, what I've seen in children's social care over the years is the emergence of a very good framework of performance reports and the quality assurance reports, which there are no surprises for Chris and his colleagues now because they know the service so well. Now, similar work is being done by the partnership. It's not yet at the same level of maturity. For example, we've talked about partners doing a self-evaluation framework on partnership working, but there's plenty of work moving in that direction. So in essence, in terms of that question of committees, that there should be a single version of the truth that's informed by evidence that informs any meeting talking about children's services or partnership now. So I think it's a really good point about the Gloucestershire Partnership. It is so much more knowledgeable about its strengths and its weaknesses now than it was in the past. And that to me is a good platform for the next level of maturity.
Okay, thank you.
It's Annette. Is it all right to come in?
Yes,
well?
doing that.
I think I just wanted to say that a lot of the work that we've been doing always, and the information sharing aspects of that work is around escalation, and what we are looking at through the Section 11 audit, which we know is slightly delayed, but will be resulting outcome will be next year. But there's a lot of work that we go back to in terms of escalation. So where there are those blockers, when, we want to know that that's being escalated at the lowest level, and then where there's blockers again, it comes up a level and up a level. We don't want to see and hear, well, we do want to see and hear it all, but it's about what does it look like at ground level. So that's where the escalation process and the escalation pathways are there embedded as a single template really across all organisations. And then the other part that I was going to say, which is just is that the examples like the discharge from hospital policy, examples like our pre-birth planning protocols, examples like what we do around non-accidental injuries when they're presenting in, all those things that we're doing are done with practitioners at the base of that. So if we get it right, working on the ground, and we know that that's what works, and they work together in a room around it, you've got a social worker, and a health visitor, and somebody, a community paediatrician, and so on. If they can show us how it will work well, and they can understand that, that's your best advocate for working together, isn't it? It's your best way of knowing how people on the ground there will pick up the phone and speak and understand this. So one of the examples that we had from the discharge planning is that hospital trusts like to know who the social worker is and how they can contact a social worker. So they're all parts that we can fix relatively easily when we talk about it and we understand where the little missing links are. So that's the sort of conversations that are going on down, I don't want to say down on the ground, but at front line. And when those when those little issues for those young people, but when they get a bit messy, we need to know those conversations are happening. And I think, we should be able to evidence that, like Kevin says, we're asking for that kind of information in the executive.
Thank you for that, Annette.
Hi, please can I ask a question? It's Barley. I'm
Yeah.
one of the ambassadors.
Yes.
I was just wondering what would constitute as acceptable care for someone who is suicidal and being discharged from hospital?
That's an excellent question. I think we need an answer from more than one person. I'd like an answer from Chris, but I'd also like an answer from Annette to that. Chris?
So that's if I understood the correct question, it's about what makes for acceptable care on discharge. Is that right?
Acceptable or excellent care on discharge, I guess.
Yeah. So it is a very good question, because it will depend, won't it, on a good, thorough individual assessment of that particular individual. There's not a kind of recipe book which says this is the best form of discharge. You know, I would say excellent care is based upon a very, very thorough assessment of that young person and the risks to that young person in particular, so that those risks can be managed. You know, the unfortunate thing is that people like me and Armin and Net, we run these services, but we can never guarantee 100% that a child or young person will be safe. Our job is to try and reduce risk as far as is possible. So I would want to know what the risks are, where that young person is being discharged to, where they're going to go immediately over the next 24 hours, who is going to be with them, what will be required of those people with them, and that would be subject to constant review over the next few days until a more permanent arrangement is worked out. So it's never out of sight, really, because I think, you know, that's where problems occur. It's not about, we all know that young people who attempt to take their own life isn't a clinical issue. Patching them up is a clinical issue, but actually making them mentally healthier and more resilient is sometimes a much bigger challenge. So we have to make certain that at the point of discharge, they're safe, well cared for, have a thoroughly good treatment regime, and we know exactly where they are and who they're with and what they're doing.
So that's what we want. Is that what happens, Chris?
Well, as I said to you, if we follow the discharge protocol, then yes, that is absolutely right.
Okay.
That's the purpose of a discharge agreement between the partners.
Okay. Annette, can I bring you in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is a really excellent question. And obviously we'd want to think that all young people and children had that excellent care pathway. But I think for me, it's about a tight planning and not letting go of that young person until, you know, somebody's got her on the other side or him on the other side. And I think, you know, so that's what that is for me. Go back into the discharge planning process and knowing that, you know, that person's being held both whilst they're in hospital having clinical treatment, and that clinical treatment can include, you know, mental health clinical treatment, and sometimes that involves keeping them safe through processes around mental health support and so on. And there are ways of keeping the support within the hospital environment and keeping that there, I think, and then how that moves on and who's best supporting that young person when they come out. And I also think it's about, we're always listening to what that young person is saying, and that might not be that they're vocalizing it with words, it might just be demonstrating it in their behaviors, but what is that about? And I think it's not an easy task. There are huge pressures in the acute, as we know, we can hear that, but I know that the Hospitals Trust, and I've had conversations with our colleagues in the Hospitals Trust, that they work very hard to make sure that handover and that support is in place. They won't, you know, they are very firm in that they don't, you know, it's not their intention to let young people leave the care of the hospital until they know that their place of safety is there, that the right support is in place. So it would be really good to understand from that cohort of young people who are experiencing those extreme mental health struggles, what is excellent care, and whether our discharge planning would work around that. That would be a good way of testing it. But I think yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question, but it is a very good question. And thanks for asking.
I wonder if you want to come back on that. Given your experience, your knowledge of some of the other ambassadors, I don't know if you've come across anybody who's tried to commit suicide and been discharged from office, but how does that relate to your lived experience?
Was that question for me? Yeah. How does it relate to my lived experience? So for me, I was discharged from hospital for a good year in and out for overdosing because I didn't want to live. This was back when I was 16. So it's quite, I feel like it's quite an important question, and I feel like a baseline is needed in terms of policies, because the amount of times I was discharged with one meeting and a crisis number to call, despite the severity of everything, it happened so much and it was really difficult for me.
So in Barley, in the hospital, what we're really aiming to do is that there are we know that self-harm, overdose, that sort of looking for ways of coping and so on is there, and not everybody is always admitted into a ward situation where that discharge planning would happen. So sometimes young people will come into the emergency department and go out, and we don't kind of really understand that. So we are working really hard with Imelda Bennett, who's our designated doctor, and the safeguarding leads in the trust, really looking to understand how else we can wrap our arms around those young people that are attending at that different level. I don't want to say lower level because it's all significant, and each bit of a harm and struggles that young people are dealing with is all important. But almost trying to get there. What do we know about those attendances before young people are admitted into wards? Because I think it's almost an admission is quite an extreme end to a presentation at a hospital and so on, and and working with GPs and so on. So I think it'd be really good to have your views as ambassadors on a lot of our policies, to be honest with you, and are we, and a lot of that, and probably reflecting on the information that we're getting. So we can certainly try to achieve engaging your comments and views on that, if that's something that you think would help. It's really helpful to know what it's like from somebody who's receiving that care, when you're in a place that you're able to feel like you can share that. Obviously we don't want, that's not to put you in a more vulnerable position and not to make you talk about things you don't want to talk about, but in terms of reflecting on how our policies land, would be really helpful, I think, at specific bits of policies like you're talking about. And I don't know if that's something we could talk about maybe as part of the quality improvement practice subgroup, perhaps potentially, that I chair.
Yeah, I think that would be excellent.
Yeah.
And Chair, if I could just interrupt, Andrea, we had may not be aware, we had the Children and Young People Mental Health briefing with Helen Ford and lots of other people last Friday, and Helen has also asked the ambassadors to work with her and the team as well. So I know Lynn Green, the participation lead for the ambassadors, is on the call, and the ambassadors with Lynn are going to be talking about that tomorrow.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us, Andrea. And I think I was just going to suggest that there should be a offline follow-up to this, but it sounds like it's already happening. So thank you very much for that. I've still got several people to speak. I've got Stephen Davis, I've got Lorraine, Charlotte, Colin, Richard, Brian, and Leslie. If there's anybody else who's indicated to speak, please stick your hand up or let myself or Andrea know quickly. But otherwise, we'll cut off at Leslie. But now, can we go on to Stephen Davis, please?
Thank you, Chair. And my question goes way back to the beginning of the meeting and Kevin's report. I was interested in the fact that his report reflected on the fact that our COVID response had been good, but there was still concern about our pace of reform. And that almost echoes to a word the recent letter from Ofsted, which I know we're going to discuss in more detail next week. But I wondered, while we had Kevin with us, whether he would want to comment on how his findings map with the Ofsted report, and any views he may have on that. Thank you.
Kevin?
I think my observations are in part based on the Ofsted. One of the major pieces of evidence, obviously, I look at is the views of the regulators. You'd expect anyone in the position I'm in, and previously was as your chair of the board, to have an impatience around speed change in terms of improving children's services. I think children's services probably share that impatience. Gloucestershire is a big county. I know Chris has said this on occasions. To make change effective across such a large set of services is quite a challenge. I point to things like this week. I've made a comment around the getting approval for some of the outcomes of the rapid reviews. Sometimes pace is about recognizing we can do things outside formal meetings now. So I've been making some suggestions about let's try not to wait until the next meeting comes up to take something you could decide on virtually. And I think the partners are up to that. I also think in terms of pace, we've seen this in children's services. It takes a long time to get a momentum for change. And as we've seen in children's services, pace has increased as more thing impact. And I'd like to see some of that around the recommendations, the serious case reviews and the rapid review. The review of the governance of the partnership that Andy Dempsey led and discussed with the delivery board has netted some intended changes to the delegation authority to the subgroups like the quality improvement in practice subgroup, so that they will not have to keep going back to the executive for permission to do things. So there are things I think that are afoot that might increase pace. There's more can be done, definitely, and I'll continue to try to press that agenda as you would expect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, was that sufficient for you?
Yes, thank you very much.
Good. Lorraine.
Hello. My comment also goes back to the beginning, almost. Can you all hear me, by the way?
Lorraine.
Yes, certainly. I think I can.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Yes, I'd like to go back to school. So I'd like to rewind your minds back to that. I have a comment when we were talking about children going to school, where they be seen, kept an eye on, etc. There are children who don't feel that going to school is a safe place to be. I have incidents in my own area of bullying regularly, but now during the COVID situation, and Charlotte's pointed out the extra workload the teachers have and how you're not seeing the parents, etc., and how it's difficult for children to go and speak to somebody on the quiet as they may have done in the past. I really think this is an issue that needs to be addressed. How we do that, I don't know in the current situation, but I would like to draw people's attention to it, especially in anyone to do with the schools, draw their attention to the fact that there are children out there who are being bullied still, and the situation is now worse. A small example, there's a child that I know of who's been bullied for years. Finally defended himself. He has now been excluded. So things aren't right as they should be. This is not right. But with the situation where people aren't getting to speak to children in an adequate way,
somebody needs to be sort of keeping an eye on that sort of thing. What do we do about that then?
Right, I'm not quite sure who that's a question for, because we don't have anyone specifically from the education sector. Chris, can I ask you to field that one? Chris? Seem to have lost Chris. Can I bring Chris back?
No, sorry, I am here. I've just unmuted. So the back end of that was an invitation just to comment on bullying, was it? Sorry, I missed that.
Yes, it was.
No, it wasn't. It was to see if there's anything we can do about the current situation, because bullying is bad enough as it is, and this is the COVID situation is making it worse. People are being missed. Children are being missed.
Yeah, I think it cuts both ways, actually. I think there are some children who find schools quite difficult, and it provokes a range of anxiety, who actually thrived during lockdown. Some of those vulnerable children who found themselves in small groups in school while the general population was in lockdown did remarkably well. So there were some children who benefited actually by that opportunity, but the whole kind of antidote, if you want, to bullying is schools being able to monitor children closely. And as I said earlier, and as Charlotte said, schools are incredibly busy places that it's harder to spot now because they've got so much on their plate. I mean, we're talking about recovery in society and some aspects of COVID. Schools are nowhere near recovery. They're still in response mode. And so they're still not really having the time or space to be able to address issues like bullying and others as well as they would like to. I'm sure Charlotte can speak as a head teacher, but if a parent comes to a head teacher or to a school concerned that their child is being bullied, then they would deal with it, but they have less time to spot it than they perhaps might do otherwise themselves.
And some
Chris, as it happens, Charlotte is next on the list to ask a question. I wonder if, Charlotte, you'd like to ask a question, but also respond to that last point.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of bullying, I think it works both ways, actually. Some children are feeling more comfortable because they're just within a very small bubble now, and so for some people that means that the number of people that they can be bullied by has decreased significantly, and they are kept away from everybody else in that bubble. The amount of supervision, the reason we're so busy in schools is because actually the amount of supervision means that whilst there are no private times with children, there are more people around generally to be able to watch out for things at first hand. But of course, it's the incidental conversations that aren't happening. So I actually think it can work both ways. I mean, we've certainly seen a decrease in incidents, and every school has bullying, and we deal with it very quickly. But we've seen a decrease in general incidents because the amount of supervision is so high at the minute, because we can't let people touch or be with each other, and so because of the popping bubbles. So if I can just ask, if I can just make a couple of, it's not really questions, it's going back to that partnership working earlier actually, and about communication. And Kevin really touched upon it, where he said this is and Chris has always said this is about undoing decades of mistrust, of not being able to work effectively together, and of course that has to come from the top. And so that's why it's strategically better in terms of partnership working now. And I would vouch for that, but it's on the ground stuff, and that's what we still continue to have problems with in school. And that is because we're trying to undo decades and decades of not working effectively together, not sharing the information. And of course, as a restorative county, we are looking to restorative practice to be our way that we do things. We all know the strapline, which is relationships matter. And relationships really do matter when you are having really tricky conversations with people and where you're making decisions and you need to share information. And of course, when we have such high turnovers of staff, and that often happens at those sorts of coal-face jobs more than the strategic roles, it takes time to build those relationships, and we still have that turnover and it's starting to settle down. That's what the letter says, and that's what we're seeing on the ground. However, it takes time to build those relationships. And so then, and only when those relationships are built up and maintained and consistent, can we have that really effective communication for working. The other thing is that I think it would be, Councillor Fisher said earlier about coordinated approach. I have to just pick that one up, because actually the primary schools in the county have worked incredibly closely and have had a very coordinated approach. The secondary schools have not, and that's been noted. And primary schools have gone constantly to GASH, the Gloucestershire Association of Secondary Heads, to specifically ask them to back us up better and to work together more, to no avail. So I think that's something that we need to take up with secondary schools, not all schools. And the letter from Ofsted, I know we're not touching on that, but it cannot go unnoticed the number of times that, as Chris said, it is peppered about this COVID, the response to COVID. And I'm not convinced that the turnaround to partnership working is entirely accidental. I don't think that it can be independent actually of COVID. What COVID has done is that it has thrown us together as partners in weekly, sometimes daily, strategy calls about the way we're working together and information sharing. So even on the education COVID call, which now happens twice a week, but in the first lockdown was daily, what actually happens is we've got Sarah Scott is on there, we've got people from all of the different agencies on that call, just one person, so that everybody knows what's happening. I think there's a lot we can learn from this COVID response, because I don't think it's independent. The success of how we've done as a county in terms of the COVID response for children and the partnership working. And I actually think that goes hand in hand. And perhaps we need to look at what we learn from this to go forward, because actually we have to have more multi-agency meetings. We have, because that naturally helps communication. And that is our issue, is the communication on the base. Thank you.
For that, Charlotte. Just to press you a little bit more on the your call for more communication. I mean, do the primary and secondary schools communicate about specific individual children as they're making that transition?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's actually really strong with most schools. It's about the coordinated response as a whole local authority, I think, and our hands are tied so much. We really have to we almost have to have that accountability going back to the regional schools commissioner, because so many of our secondary schools are academies.
Message would you, I did the same thing, I was speaking while I was muted. What if the RSC was at this meeting, what message would you have for them to take away in terms of promoting communication?
I can be
Resolve the people who check. I can't tell you, Andrew, because the RSC is not at this meeting, and I can't envisage that it would be a meeting that they would find time for. But I really don't know. I haven't had, it's very tricky to say, because I don't have to work directly with the RSC, and it's a very different ball game to working directly with the local authority. But there's certainly, we've got a very different school system now than the school we had 20 and 30 years ago. And it's very difficult to have a coordinated approach when you have different people running different systems.
Perhaps this is something that maybe Chris could take up offline. Can we, I'm conscious of time, can we move on to Colin now, please?
Okay, Chair. To some extent, it follows on from what Charlotte was saying. And one of the issues that I've raised before, and I just want to know how it's going really, is particularly in regards to safeguarding and reporting from not so much individuals, although that's important, but other organisations that may raise concerns, and what kind of feedback is given to them. The root of the question relates to a safeguarding issue with a school, where the school had raised issues on a number of occasions, but actually it wasn't being actioned. And I mean, I don't want to sort of go into that, but even at an early stage on safeguarding when I was involved, I always felt that people reporting stuff needed to know that not only had it been kind of received, but have some feedback on what was happening, because that actually reinforces the notion that action is being taken and everything else. That may have been sorted, because I have raised it before, and I know that it's quite a difficult issue because of knowing exactly what you can and can't say because of confidentiality. So I know it's a difficult issue, but one I think is still important, that there's that, in a sense, appropriate feedback to know that actually the concerns have been dealt with properly.
Chris, do you want to respond to that briefly?
Yeah, I mean, an easy answer would be, to refer to legislation, and if someone or an organisation, like say a school, refers a child because of safeguarding concerns, there are two duties that need to be enacted. One is that if a referral is received, then if it's children's social care, they have to respond to it, even if that response is to say this case doesn't meet threshold, and therefore we're not going to do anything about it, or to step it down to early help, i.e. it doesn't meet threshold, but actually I can see absolutely why you're concerned, so we're going to refer this on to our family group conferencing team or our community social worker or our educational psychologist, some other service, but one that hasn't is available at an earlier stage, if you like, on the child's journey, so to speak. The other duty is on the referrer to follow up. So in this case, if it's a school and they haven't heard anything, they have a duty to follow up and to say and ask what's happened with that referral to the child that we referred to you. So there's two duties on two people, the referrer and the receiver of the referral, which means that shouldn't happen. But inevitably, Colin wouldn't be asking the question if it didn't happen. It does happen. And I think one of the frustrations when I talk to my colleagues in schools is that, they do often refer, but then social services don't take the case on. And more frustratingly, occasionally, I have to say, and I'm responsible for the service, that the feedback of the kind I just rehearsed with you about we don't think it meets threshold, but we have stepped it down to another service, often isn't fed back to the school. And that's still a feature of a service that needs to improve more. I think that is happening on a much more regular basis. I mean, I think the relationship between schools and the local authority has improved, and I think Charlotte's absolutely right. It's been a kind of an enforced improvement in some respects because of COVID, but I hope it's also a consequence of people realising that we're stronger together than apart. So I do think that will improve. And recently, I've had, in response to the focus visit, I've had 3 head teachers write to me and say, well done, which is great, and also to say that they've experienced an improvement in services as well. So, I've probably gone offline a bit, but I do think that partnership between schools and local authority, and crucially, partners' understanding of thresholds, is very important, because again, that was highlighted in the focused visit as something that required strengthening, and it was more in relation to our statutory partners than to schools, but it would include schools, and that is that our partners, it would appear, due to the number of contacts that we have that don't reach the threshold for referral, do not have a good grip of those thresholds, or a sufficiently good grip of those thresholds. And do you see what I'm saying? I'm saying that, if you understood the threshold for intervention by children's social care, you wouldn't refer the child in the first place. You'd refer them for early help. And so I think we've still got quite a long way to go. And I've never worked in an authority where it isn't the case that you can never, ever rest on your laurels about assuming everybody understands thresholds. It's something you have to keep banging away at, keep doing training, keep sharing intelligence, raising awareness around the threshold for intervention. And you still don't ever solve the problem. It's all, because staff churn, new people come and go. And so it's really important that we have regular updates and training on thresholds.
So specifically, Chris, if you were a teacher, so Brian, I think Brian's trying to get Brian.
My question.
Yeah.
Can I just come back and follow up on what Chris said?
Oh, sorry. Who's that? Colin. Yes, sure. Colin, do come in, Colin.
I'm sorry. What was the reason I said, someone raising issues is just that point, and it's not so much that they understand that it requires a referral, but when they're raising issues that actually something doesn't feel right, could be something more involved, or it might not be. And it's that sort of grey area and understanding the response. And I appreciate the response that you've given, Chris. And, having said what you did, in a year's time, if I get re-elected, may ask the same question, just to make sure that, it's developing well as you think it should. But it is that kind of grey area, and the feedback saying it's not really a referral, it might be intervention, but these are the things that we'd be looking for, and this is what you need to keep an eye on. It's that kind of feedback which is encouraging, educational, and develops a better kind of understanding from all sides.
Banking for the bad side of the website, but suddenly it crashed before we could check what it is. Now the news of the vaccine.
So we're getting, I think we're getting some echo there.
I'm sorry, Chair, that was Nigel Gore who had become unmuted. I have now muted him.
Chris, I just wonder if you can clarify, those people working in education, specifically, how would they become aware of what the thresholds are? I mean, have you got all their email addresses, or would you email the head teachers, or is there some kind of secure website that you can publish these things on? I mean, how would they become aware?
It's Annette. Do you want me to answer that question? Because it's part of the multi-agency training, Andrew, and it's part of what we share and cascade time. So the levels of intervention is a guidance document that's been agreed through the partnership. It's been it's been updated and refreshed, I think, at the beginning of the end of last year. Where as a partnership, there was a working group around that to ensure that the levels encompassed areas of concerns around education. A finite tool. It's not a finite directive on everything that happens, but it is a really good guidance document, and it talks about the level, you know, in terms of the where you would want to be thinking about significant harm, where you think about early help, or where you'd be assured that actually this is part of a universal provision service to everybody. I think that's and it's within training. It's with an update training on the Gloucestershire Safeguarding Children's Executive provide as a multi-agency and interagency platform, and also I think probably I would say, and Charlotte would hopefully agree, is that the designated Safeguarding Leads Forum would be also a venue where that threshold document would go to and cascaded further. So it's not a secret document. It's a document that's on the website. It's a document that's been well communicated in various training and newsletter and alert forums and so on. I think that for me, the response to I echo what Colin says. I think there is sometimes a bit of a lag and a bit of a confusion about the outcome of a referral in. I think education do make the majority of referrals into children's social care. I think that's where the highest number generally comes from. I understand from the MASH area. And in terms of health, we feel that same pushback from primary care predominantly, because our GPs will say, I made a referral and I haven't heard anything. So we're, I have a named GP who works with me, and we have our forums where we share this information on. We're constantly reminding colleagues that it is also your responsibility as a practitioner to follow up that referral. Of course, we've got people who are working in really busy environments. You know, school doesn't stand still through the day, and there's lots of things to do. And what we know in terms of GP practice and obviously other areas of health practice is that there's very busy clinics, 10-minute appointments. You know how, you know, that you all know how that works from your own experiences of attending, and you can see what happens in schools. Referrals are done often in lunch times at the end of the day. It's put together, and following that up is actually a real challenge, but it is the duty on the person who's made the referral to find out what's happened. There's also a duty on the MASH to communicate that. And one thing we're picking up is whether that's an information sharing issue or just an information governance issue. So letting somebody know that they're actually on a child in need plan might be something that is usually something that's really helpful for us as partners to know. We don't necessarily need the detail of that. And of course, a child in need plan is all about how you consensually and collaboratively work with a family and a child to make things better. So it's about their choice of who they'd like to be involved and to be supported by. So there are little bits around it. We're picking that up and following that through. An issue around outcomes came up in one of the a tiny part of one of the rapid reviews. So I know that Kevin Buck, who runs the MASH brilliantly, is looking at that as a specific focus point. Hopefully that'll be improved in short time.
Thank you very much, Annette. I've now got Richard Castle, Brian, Leslie, Becca, and I'll follow up with a question from myself. And I think I'd like to draw a line under questions at that point. I was hoping to finish by around about 12:30 if possible. So Richard, can I bring you in now?
Yeah, good morning. Firstly, just on the rabbit hole of the education sector, within the Republic of Stroud primary school area, we very much used what's called a restore model, which we found exceptionally effective in certainly in the primary school area in enabling children and encouraging them to come to people even more than they would have done pre to COVID. So if anyone's interested, the restore model is the one we've used. My actual question actually goes right back to 2 hours ago when we kicked off and looking at Kevin's very helpful report, for which thank you. And I was very pleased to see in that the emphasis is going to be on changing outcomes rather than getting too concerned about the process. With that in mind, Kevin particularly, could I refer you to paragraph 3.6 of your report, which talks about how some of the demands on capacity have meant that some key areas of work have not been taken forward as quickly as GCSE would have wished. My direct question, given the emphasis there always is on groups, subgroups, forum groups, and every other type of group, what impact do you believe there's been on our children from a safeguarding perspective through this delay?
And over to you.
So, very hard to specifically say what impact on children. It is probably the recommendations out of the serious case reviews, which I'll have a lot more information on after the Section 11 audit, would probably be the area I would be most concerned about, because we know that is about changing practices that in the cases that were reviewed as part of the serious case review had impacted severely on those children involved in those cases. But as I say, the Section 11 is the formal time to check where they've been done. Some of the work that I've referred to has been delayed is slightly at the higher level. It's about the partnership knowing itself. The multi-agency audit, I think everyone would wish we had got done quicker. But I have to say, partners have had to make some very difficult choices during COVID as to where they put their capacity. And I think they've to date fairly balanced that fairly well. Though they know I've been saying to them, for example, on the multi-agency audit, now is time to get going. And I understand from Annette, and Annette may say more. Of course, it's not that the work has not been done, it has been delayed. So there's several pieces of work now coming together in December. Now, should those timescales begin to slip, I think I would then begin to look, say to the partners, the sense of priority might need to be adjusted a little. But I'm confident that they're just about holding on track. And as I said in my report, the next 6 months, I think is a very critical time for the partnership. And certainly that will probably lead up to when there's a possibility Ofsted will return. And I think all partners want to come out of the eventual Ofsted inspection with credit for the progress they have made. So there's still more to be done. So I think, as Chris said earlier, the overall picture is an improving picture, how the county is supporting children and doing its safeguarding. But it is a journey that you are still on to get to the point where, you get as high a level of assurance from me as you can get, and indeed from Chris. Probably time to just put the foot on the gas. And so on. And there's another, I've just mentioned it briefly because I mentioned it in my report. There is work you've got going which is pertinent to the contribution that Charlotte made earlier about getting schools to work together. That's the work you're doing on your Health and Wellbeing Board, which is about how do all partners come together to assure the well-being of all children, what I call the Section 10 response to the Children Act. That's an important piece of work, because through that you're trying to shape the terms of your new partnership. And I know Chris has done quite a lot of work with schools, with head teacher colleagues, trying to define what the relationship should be going forward, even given the disparity in the system. So again, I'm optimistic as that comes to completion, you will have a clear picture of how you wish to work together as partners, which includes very strong safeguarding arrangements.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for your question, Richard. So we're now on to Brian.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question's been changing as I've been listening. So that's it. You just got the optimum point where you've asked me now. So my thoughts really in listening to what's been going on today. is coming back to the individual that we're trying to help. And it just occurred to me, sometimes if you put yourself in the position of the child that's being helped, it's quite a scary prospect, because all of the decisions about their life are being made by somebody else. And my own experience sometimes when other people make decisions for me is I sometimes feel I haven't been listened to. But I'm actually quite capable of saying that and raising the point. And to be honest, the areas of the decisions are made for me are not that great. But when the home you live in and the people you're placed with is all done by somebody else, and when people are feeling suicidal and they're not being listened to. So my concern is that when we have these, which we all do, we actually make assumptions about what people's problems are and what the solution ought to be. And I think we do this because it's shorthand for getting through life. But it's very dangerous, and it's particularly dangerous when you have a sort of group of people making decisions about somebody, because you get a bit of group think where everybody knows what's best for somebody. So I'm just wondering how, actually Kevin would like to answer this, how you can make sure that the individuals that are being helped are actually being listened to and treated as individuals, rather than numbers where we've already made a viewpoint that this is the treatment they need. And some of my thoughts here come from the Alternative Middle School, where we often get individuals that need individual listening to and individual help. And I just wondered how we can make sure that we're always doing that. I'm sure the protocol says we should, but this is about practice. Thanks.
So Chair, I think, Brad, you make some very important points. There is this really good piece of work that the ambassadors have been leading in Gloucestershire, the language that cares. I went along to the training session that they run on this, and it made a most profound impact on me, despite the number of years I've been in children's social care, to listen to somebody who'd been in the care system talking to you about what it was like when they read their file, how they didn't feel listened to, and so on. And I think this is part of the culture shift that is trying to be delivered through the improvement program, so that social workers are listening very much to what the children and people are saying. This deferment to adult views that we see in in serious case reviews, and this over-optimism, again, is a characteristic of not listening to the child and the young person. I think, the ambassadors may want to say something. I talk to the ambassadors to try to listen to them and about how we do this. And we just have to extol every professional working with children and young people to remember that they are the focus, and that therefore we must listen very carefully to what they need. I think the other thing is that observation. Some children face intervention by a lot of professionals, but what they really need is a single person to whom they can relate, and then that of course then relates to issues like the stability in the social workforce. So a bit like Chris said on the thresholds, working to hear the voice of the child and the young person, and making sure we use language that cares, is one of the perennials in social care. It's something we all need to work at and remember day in, day out. So as I say, the training, the language that cares training course, I know also had a profound effect on the professionals in the room who were subject to that. So hopefully that's rubbed off in terms of the way they practice.
Thank you for that. Chair, if I could, I just have one other question which I'd like to put today. It's regarding the comment about dental treatment not being available. And as we've got a health person here at the meeting today, I wondered if we could get some comments about what's going to happen about dental treatment, because it's not just a problem for children, it's a problem for everybody. Do we know when it's going to return to sort of normal, and when we can, because it does seem to lead into other types of health problems if you don't have good dental health.
Thank you, Brian. I think that's a good question, and one I've got a personal interest in as well. So, yes, Annette.
I can't answer that bigger question. I don't think I can try and find an answer from other colleagues whilst we're on the call. So I'll endeavour to do that once I've answered. But in terms of I think it was from memory. I think it was the children in care, concern about children in care not being able to access dental provision during the lockdown period or as they needed it. And I think the response from the children in care health team, from my colleagues there, is that actually I think 70% of children did get the dental treatment that they needed at the time they needed it, which I think, again, this is from memory, that was actually better than other areas of this nationally. Not underestimating that's obviously would have been a significant need. I think we know during the lockdown period that obviously dental treatment was purely for urgent and emergency cases. And I think the other issue with children in care is often I think the whole area of dental neglect is a massive one, and I don't think it's one that's necessarily seen so much. Is part of what we look at in the neglect toolkit. But I think when children come into care, dental health and dental care is such an important thing, because it's potentially one of those areas that's been really neglected right from very early on. So you're looking at children who have got dental needs that haven't been addressed for a long period of time. So that's really significant. I know myself, I'm a health visitor by background, and a lot of the children I work with when there were child protection plans, we would see them come into care and really unearth a lot of issues such as dental healthcare needs, as well as other healthcare needs as well. I think from my memory, we can probably say that we did better in this county than other areas did. If you bear with me, I'll ask the question of colleagues and see if I can get a response in the next 20 minutes from others. Okay.
Boyles?
Yes, Richard, do come in.
Yeah, Annette, you don't have to. We had an announcement from the CCG last week to a children's meeting, and Chris will be able to verify this, that the work has been done to make sure that children in care can receive the appropriate appointments, and we're circulating that to all the professionals that to make sure that they're aware that systems have now been put in place. There was delays over COVID, but that's now been managed and has been sorted out. Chris might have some more detail, but that is the current position. So thanks very much.
Chris, thanks Richard, thanks very much for bringing that to us, our attention. I hope that answers Brian's question as well. Can we quickly go on to Leslie, then I've got Becca, and then I have a question of my own. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you very much. And yes, if Richard hadn't got there first, I would have mentioned dental care, because corporate parents have raised that on a number of occasions and have been reassured that that is being dealt with. But language is really important, and it was something that was raised in the video that we were sent to have a look at before the last improvement board meeting. And the ambassadors were talking that were on the video were saying how language is important, and they sometimes feel that what is written isn't written in a caring enough fashion. But the observation I wanted to make was really about the use of the phrase "commit suicide," which somebody used earlier in this meeting, and it is a phrase which is in today's world just not used. If you want to talk about somebody who's taken their own life, you can talk about them taking their own life, or you can possibly mention that they died by suicide. But the word commit is an absolute no-no. It has connotations of crime. Suicide isn't a crime, and I think we really should be careful. I think language I've always thought language is important. I'm very boring about it. And with mental health stuff, it is even more important that we get it right, and that we're sensitive to other people. But if I could impress on people not to use that phrase and just to think about how they talk about it, that would be great. And and being able to talk to people about how they're feeling about their lives. There's a campaign going on at the moment, which someone I have a great admiration for is Alistair Campbell, who is spearheading a campaign called Ask Now, Save Lives, which is about trying to help people talk about how they're feeling. So if anybody's interested, there is stuff on the internet about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Leslie. I will personally take on board your suggestions around language. Can we move on now to Becca?
Hi there. Well, actually, I had my question a while ago, and it actually got answered by Andrew Miller. So thank you. But I have a second thing to say, Kevin. I think from all of the ambassadors, we really appreciate you bringing up language that cares, because it shows that it really is making an impact to some people. And also, Leslie, it's really brilliant to see that people can notice that this is a big problem and it needs to change, and it really is making an impact on some people, and it's really appreciated, and thank you for that. And my question is, it's referring to going back to referrals at school and such like that. I was just wondering what kind of training is given to the head teachers. What kind of training is given to the head teachers when it comes to a child self-referring themselves? Because personally, I tried to self-refer myself in school, and this was 7 years ago now. But I think it just wasn't taken seriously. I tried to refer myself to my head teacher. They called my abuser up, told them everything that I said, and sent me home and said, come back on Monday and tell us if you're okay. So I really think that's a huge problem, that self-referrals from young children aren't being taken as seriously. And that also goes back to the child's voice is not being heard. It's people think, oh, they're just over-exaggerating, or it's not as serious as it is. But I think if a young child is getting the courage to go to a head teacher and explain that there really is a problem and they're asking for help immediately, that it needs to be taken more seriously. So I was wondering what training's kind of brought around self-referrals, or are they only being trained to refer children themselves?
Thank you, Becca. That's quite shocking. I know it was 7 years ago, but it's quite shocking to hear what your experience was. Kevin, can you come back on that, please?
Yeah, certainly. So, Becca, what you've described would be very, very, very poor practice, and it shouldn't happen in the system. So there is a program of training delivered by the GSCE aimed at schools. I think the issue with head teacher training is head teachers are more likely to have direct training in safeguarding, I would argue, at primary school level than at secondary, but secondaries would have a designated safeguarding lead. Gloucestershire does have a very strong network. Most schools designated safeguarding leads participate in it, and that's the way one tries to cascade training and good practice. So there is training out there. But, this point we're talking about culture and attitude. The attitude we need in schools is any young person making any form of disclosure must be taken seriously. And there must be some thought about what action to take as a consequence of that disclosure. That issues you'd raised were actually referred to your abuser is really, in my view, very poor practice and unforgivable. So one of the things we do on the back of serious case reviews, which sometimes identify such practices, is through the dissemination of training about that serious case review, we get into a dialogue with professionals about how they should act in these situations. So that's the input through which the system tries to ensure that you would have got a better response to your disclosure. Can I give you a guarantee that it would never happen to a young person again? Well, sadly, I don't think you can. All the leaders of the system have to do is to keep hammering home these messages about listening to young people and responding in an appropriate and sympathetic manner.
Yeah, could I ask, is the training implemented? Currently, is the training actually being implemented? And if it is it used for, Gloucestershire County Council? Is it for everyone?
Yeah, there's multi-agency training, Becca. I think it's a good question to ask. What has been the impact of that training? Yeah. Because practice is still variable across schools, across organisations. So that's part of the work of the safeguarding partners in the structure is to make sure that adequate training is available and that it has impact. So there's probably still a lot of work to be done in some areas of the county around making sure that training has the desired impact.
I was going to say, if on a personal note, do you believe that, for anyone's question for everyone, on a personal note, do you believe that schools are doing enough to safeguard children at this current time? And even not this current time, before lockdown, after, do you think that it really is being implemented and there is positive effects coming from it?
So I just go first on that, because I think it's what Charlotte said earlier. One of the interesting things I've observed across both the counties I'm involved in is I've seen what I would call a return to practices that predated the change in the school system, with schools much more actively involved in identifying and working with services to safeguard children. I think, Becca, you're right, and Charlotte said the same. We should not lose, and we must not lose, some of those positives that have come out of the COVID response, that better communication, that sharing of information. I think the issue with the school sector is probably for every school I could hold you as an exemplar of good safeguarding practice, we could probably find one where we would want them to improve. But by and large, if you just ask a straight question, do I think schools in Gloucestershire are taking the safeguarding responsibilities? Well, the evidence would suggest that many of them are. And of course, what we never discuss, we never do a really good case review. We always do serious case reviews. There are some really good examples where through the tenacity of schools or social workers, children have been kept safe. Because what we all want is 100% consistency, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Chair, can I come in?
Yes, I was going to invite you anyway, Chris.
Okay, thanks, because I think it's raised a really important issue, and I'm going to say something that's going to be quite controversial now, I think. But you know, that's my role. I'm a champion for children, and those of you that know me well will know that I speak my mind when it needs to be spoken. I think safeguarding training should be mandatory, and I include all of you councillors who are sat on this committee today. And I've said that before, and I will say it again. I think it should be part of the Constitution. The members that are on this committee today are members that have an interest in children, and I'm sure I wouldn't need to persuade them to do safeguarding training because you all have an interest in children. That's why you're on this particular committee. But generally speaking, even where members do not serve on something like the Children and Family Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I still think training for all members should be mandatory. I think it should be written into the Constitution, and I don't think any member should be allowed to serve on any committee until they've done it. Now, I know that's controversial. I won't be thanked for it by some of your colleagues, but you are all corporate parents, and you should all take that responsibility very, very seriously when you sign up as a local councillor. Similarly, I would challenge schools and say that all safeguarding training for head teachers should be mandatory. It shouldn't be optional. I think it's something that when you become a head, you should do at the start as part of your induction, and then you should have a refresh every year, just as a GP does. And I think it should be part of your professional qualification to maintain that training and that awareness. So I think there are some systems things that we can do. The other thing is to observe what you see on a daily basis and see it for what it is. So if you think about notorious cases like Daniel Pelker, who was the little boy in Coventry who was virtually starved and beaten to death. He was by his mother and her partner. That little boy was at school and was eating from the rubbish bins, and he was told off for stealing, eating food from the rubbish bin. Now, honestly, if you step back from that and ask yourself the simple question, is this child being naughty or is he hungry? then the obvious answer is that he's hungry. He wouldn't be looking in bins for food or stealing food from other children's lunch boxes if he wasn't hungry. It's not something that you would do naturally. And that is a very, very exceptional case. And I think the vast majority of schools, you know, almost without exception, take their safeguarding responsibilities very, very seriously, and they do train up to the teeth. But you can never do enough training, you can never do enough awareness raising, and you can never do enough to systemically building those safeguards, which I've just rehearsed with you. So it's quite a strong statement, but I believe it. I believe in that. And I'd be, as a Director of Children's Services, negligent in my duty if I didn't say to everybody, head teachers, counsellors, you are all responsible. It doesn't boil down to me and my staff.
Thank you for that, Chris. I wonder, so in terms of mandatory training for schools, it would, to be comprehensive, I think it would have to be mandated by the DFE or at least the RSC, if I'm not mistaken. In terms of mandatory training for counsellors, I wondered, Richard, if I could bring you in on this point to respond.
Yeah, it's something that we would, as corporate parents, can discuss and then recommend to full council, because corporate parenting isn't a mandating committee, as it were. But it's something that we need to make sure that we can discuss, understand, and then as each individual members of the political groups that sit on corporate parenting can take those messages back to their own groups, and then, you know, we take it to full council as a report and take it from there.
Yes, that sounds sensible to me. Andrew. Sorry.
I'm going to be I'm really sorry, but I'm sort of sitting here feeling slightly incandescent about this, because I do so agree with Chris. And it's not for want of trying to say that we are all corporate parents. We do all have a duty. It's corporate responsibility. And I do think the training should be mandatory. And it's the only reason it isn't is because the Conservative group, and I assume this is your leader, won't do it because, you know, you are libertarians and you can't insist on things being done. And it is appalling that people haven't got the bottle to actually say this should happen. It's not a nice to have, it's something we should do. And I last night sat at a parish council meeting and heard somebody complaining about two young people who were sitting on a bench near her house in the pouring rain. And I said, why didn't you go out and ask them what the matter was? And she said, well, she didn't like to. They might have issues. I mean, I just don't, you can hear how cross I am. I cannot understand why we are not, as a body, taking this really seriously. So you're now chairing this scrutiny committee, and there are other Conservative members on this group who have heard this. You really, really should be making sure that in the next term, this is safeguarding training. Listening skills are part of the development and should be there. Like it or not, people should attend. And if they don't attend, then there have to be some sort of sanction, like they don't do anything else. But please, it's, you know, we are behind the curve by not doing this. Thank you very much for letting me interrupt.
So thank you, Leslie. I know your passion, and I think passion is appropriate for those of us who are local government representatives. Richard, your suggestion, I believe, was to take this away and ask for it to be asked for a report on this for full council. Did I hear correctly?
Yeah, well, what I'm telling you is let the corporate parenting group look at this and then take it to full council as a report. And if Andrea can make that note, then that can be passed across to corporate parenting, and we can bring it up and raise it through there, is what I would suggest.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a corporate parenting group next week, but the agenda's already been published for that, Richard. Could we take it as an extra item or not next week? It's next Wednesday, isn't it?
I'd have to check on the timings, but it's something I would look sympathetically on.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you for that, Richard. So I've got, yes, I know, Bernie, that you were wanting to speak to. I'll just check if there was anybody else. I think it's just Bernie, and then I will. I do apologise if I missed someone. Can you be fairly brief, though?
I will. It's just on that last point. I'm a borough councillor and I'm a county councillor. I'm on both plannings. Because they're quasi-judicial, it is compulsory to take the training. Otherwise, you cannot sit, and you have to be updated and attend so many meetings. Otherwise, you lapse. Now, we volunteer to be councillors, and I think we should volunteer to take the training if we're going to sit on things that need training, like something which is much more important than a planning issue. It could be a child's life, and I take it very responsibly, but I sometimes feel inadequate because all the only training I've had is bringing up 2 kids, and I've got 3 grandkids, and I've always had my 2 kids have always had their mates around my house and things like that, and they seem to have liked me and not told me to go away too impolitely. So they also drank the beer and stuff like that, but I didn't mind that. So really, it should be part of the training for new councillors. That if you're thinking you're going to sit on something that involves something as important as this, you should have some training, for God's sake.
Sure. We've heard of commitment from Richard to discuss at corporate parents, whether next week or a future meeting. We'll have to see. So, it's something I think that we're taking seriously. I've got Charlotte, who also wants to come in. I think I really am going to have to make this the last question. Over to you, Charlotte.
Yeah, sorry, it's not a question. I think it's just following on from Becca's question earlier about the impact of safeguarding training for head teachers. I was horrified, Becca, actually, to hear that. But I think it's really useful for everybody to know, because this is a really a recent adjustment to the training. Training now for head teachers, well, it's actually not just head teachers, it's DSL, so designated safeguarding leads, which I totally agree needs to also include every head teacher, because they don't always put themselves forward as the designated safeguarding lead, and I think they should as an organisation head. But the training has changed, and the Gloucestershire Safeguarding Children's Executive has now altered that level 3 training, so that we do our training, which is a whole day, and then the refresher training is half a day. But also we're expected year on year to do an additional 10 hours of safeguarding DSL training, which and next week one of the hours that I have chosen to do is the thing that was talked about earlier, about listening and about kind talking. Sorry, I can't remember the actual phrase that was used, but that's the one that I have chosen to do next week as one of my additional hours of that 10 hours that I have to do in the next year. So that is, I think, a really positive change for Gloucestershire, and it is new. It literally was told to us a week ago, so that's hot off the press, and hopefully will reassure Becca, but also everybody else in terms of that training. But absolutely, we need to make sure that every head teacher has their safeguarding training.
Very much, Charlotte.
Andrew, it's Chris. I think what Charlotte just said is interesting, and it's encouraging that the training is being valued. But the problem is still, given the fragmented nature of the landscape, with different governance arrangements like multi-academy trusts and standalone academies, diocesan schools, local authority schools, free schools. There is no mandation for head teachers to do it. As I say, the vast majority take it seriously and do the training. But there are still some schools where, and I think, without being disrespectful to my secondary colleagues, I think Charlotte's probably right as well, is that it's probably not the secondary, it's probably the secondary heads that don't do that training. I think most of the primaries do, because in a lot of the cases, they are the designated lead, aren't they, Charlotte? So they do the training. But I do think, the problem is that the problem is the lowest common denominator. What about those schools where the head teacher refuses to do the training and the DSL isn't very good? That's where the risk is greatest, isn't it? And I know that's a small minority, but they do exist, those schools, and that's where children are most at risk.
Yeah, I understand. Am I right? It would require the DFE to mandate that, or possibly to introduce.
Oh yeah, we couldn't. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So look, I think I can't. The council can't. Can't issue a decree, and that happened. What I will is take an offline. I'll talk to Richard Boyles about this later, about how we could take that forward.
I mean, what we could do is accept it as a strategy, with our head teacher associations. We could take papers to the Head Teachers Association and ask them to adopt it. Again, it still wouldn't be mandated, but at least you'd have an association and a little bit of peer pressure on somebody who might not think it's their responsibility. Can't think, that there would be.
I hear what you're saying, Chris, and I think it's a serious issue. I think quite how to go forward, I'm not sure, and I will consult. I will talk with Richard about what we could do to take that forward as a council. But obviously, we can only do things which are within our power.
Chair, just a quick point from me, Kevin. The DFE guidance, keeping children safe in education, already sets a high expectation that schools should have the knowledge and the skills and the approach to do safeguarding. I think Chris's discussion about how you get certain that your schools are following that and some sort of local protocol would, in my view, probably be a little more fruitful than. So I doubt DFE will actually ever mandate a particular training, but they would probably say we already have set the standard through the guidance that schools should have appropriate training in place.
Understood. As I say, I'll talk to Richard to look at what would the best way would be to take that forward. But I don't think we can. Yeah, it may be that the nudge rather than the mandate is what's appropriate. I think we're coming. Basically, I think we've come to the end of our questions. So I'd like to thank you, Kevin, for the work that you've put forward, that you've done on this, and for your interim report. Thank you very much for that hard work. Thank you to our partners, to the police and the clinical commissioning group who've attended, and thank you to our ambassadors for coming and asking questions. I think we've had a really good and vigorous debate, and I look forward to seeing some of you again on Tuesday when we are going to debate the Ofsted letter amongst other issues. So thank you very much and goodbye.